And as we always do, and we'll repeat probably a few times through the call, we do post the recording and any other sort of resources from the call on our GFAN website. So you will be able to see that, as Conte said, in a few days. So welcome everybody. Okay. So a little bit of GFAN business before we dive into the big part of today's agenda. I think many of you will have seen that we have welcomed a new team member, and so she has been on a few calls in the background, but I just wanted to formally take a moment on this call to introduce and welcome Rita Zawi to our team. And Rita, pass it over to you to say hello to your GFAN colleagues and network and introduce yourself.
Okay, so thank you, Katie. Thank you, Quentin. I've seen on the program that I have 5 minutes. I think it's quite a lot to introduce myself. But it's not enough to say how much I'm thrilled to officially join the GFAN team. So I'll be involved over the next year and a half to support all the efforts toward the eighth replenishment. So count on me to dive in, and I'm really honored to be working alongside such experienced experts and grounded activists. And I know that it's not every day that we get to work with people who are both brilliant and so dedicated to global health. So thank you all for the warm welcome, and I think that I have a lot to learn from this group, and I'm here to listen, collaborate, and give my all. So I'm ready to work hard, and thank you for having me, and let's keep working.
Thank you, Rita. It's wonderful to have you join the team, and opens the possibility of future, GFAN meetings, for example, in Morocco. So with somebody based there. So, we're always interested in that. So we have a Global Fund board meeting that is coming up, and it is intense, if I think I could say one word to describe, at least in the delegation that I sit within, the developed country NGO delegation, some of the preparations and some of the key issues that are going to be discussed. So I don't want to take a huge amount of time, but just to say, we're expecting essentially the core sort of policies that determine how and who is funded by the Global Fund after the next replenishment to be up for decision, at least discussion. Let's see how many we get to decisions on. And this includes incredibly varied discussions around issues like the disease split, which you may all recall from before the last replenishment. There was significant board discussion, and there was an adjustment made to the allocation policies to increase the share of TB and malaria TB after a certain amount of sort of base replenishment. And that is the discussion at the moment now. And I will let others cover that in more detail. Those who were at the recent committee meetings know that that was a very challenging discussion because of, different perspectives. The reason we're so challenged in those discussions is not because it's really hard to believe that, we need to invest more in TB, for example, or malaria, for example, and continue to invest significantly in HIV. It's because we are placed in this, into this smaller piece of the puzzle by the amount of funding that we have, which currently is less than we wanted to have. And all of the signals right now around resource mobilization for the 8th replenishment is that it's tough, that there's tough conversations happening amongst and with donors. And so we do have to keep that in mind as we listen today and as we go forward, that, the reason that some of these discussions can be and are so difficult is not because of the policies themselves per se, but because of the likely realistic outcomes if a replenishment scenario, arrives at about the same amount of funding that we had from the 7th or only a small increase. And I'll remind you of, the way that we worked on those sort of different kinds of scenarios in our How to Close a Funding Gap report that we released this summer, which hopefully provides some guidance and some, I don't know, maybe inspiration about how to talk about the reasons why we do actually need to fully fund the Global Fund at the highest level possible. So we will hear about resource mobilization at the board meeting as well. I don't expect it to be a significantly technical discussion. It rarely is. The technical stuff sits within all of these policies that are being discussed. So allocation, eligibility, sustainability and transition, as well as the prioritization of catalytic investments, which is sort of within that as alongside disease split conversations. But I'm sure we will hear a lot about resource mobilization, a lot about the eighth replenishment, and probably start to see a little bit about early sort of campaign messaging for the eighth replenishment. I expect we'll also have a lot of discussion, if not at the board table, certainly on the sidelines around the joint working group, around global health institution collaboration. That joint working group, my understanding is it met for the first time at the beginning of this month and involves representatives from the Global Fund, from Gavi, and from GFF. So I expect we'll hear a lot about that. And maybe colleagues from some of the board constituencies can speak more to this, but I was on a call with a number of you last week, I think it was, or maybe it was just earlier this week, who can remember, but about sort of, the engagement of communities and civil society from Malawi at and during the board meeting. And it still felt a little unclear in terms of how many colleagues from Malawian civil society or community organizations, for example, might attend the board meeting itself, but that there were some side events, some site visits, etc., that were being planned. But of course, I think many of us sort of push the idea that there should be more, at least engagement as, within the board meeting and within some of the conversations as much as possible within the board governance rules and that kind of thing. So I am simply going to pass it over to the three delegations who all do have representatives here today. So we're going to go through to the developed country NGO delegation, the communities delegation, and the developing country NGO delegation. And then I would recommend, we know how long these conversations are, but the reason we've extended this call past 1 hour is to make sure that we have enough time for your questions and discussion. So hopefully you can stick with us. Use the chat. We'll do our best to moderate that as we go through these presentations and reflections from the delegations. And then we will open it up for discussion in the usual way in terms of raising hands if you can, or using the chat. So Catherine, I think I might be passing it off to you.
Great.
Catherine
Thanks,
Connor,
Kate.
everybody.
Woo. Thanks, everyone. I am Catherine Connor. I'm the alternate board member from the Developed Country NGO delegation. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. The beauty of going first is I don't have to repeat anybody, but it also means I'm going to leave stuff out. So I look forward to Mick and Yolanda correcting me or reminding me of things that are on the table. I am going to try to just stick to the high points. I want to make one caveat, one comment before I start. The caveat is, our delegation is still deliberating on a lot of these topics, and I'm glad that's why we're on the call today. We've just gotten through the committee process, but we're still awaiting more information before the board meeting. So please consider this all preliminary, more what we're thinking versus any decisions we've made. And the other comment is, that this all reflects on replenishment. And I think Katie alluded to this, is that, one of the frustrations of these conversations is we're making decisions in all these sort of resource scenarios, but we're actually sitting at the Global Fund table with the people who dominate whether we have a successful replenishment or not. So it always feels a little bit like, the people who can really create a strong replenishment are around the table. And so it feels like we have a lot of work to do at the table, but also outside the table. I want to start with sort of the allocation methodology, just briefly. I think our delegation's really committed and understand that we have to balance the allocation methodology. We have to focus, and we agree with the focus on putting a lot of the money into the countries that have the highest disease burden and that are really in need of this funding. But we also want to acknowledge that the key populations issues tend to be in the concentrated epidemic issues can often be in those countries that may not be considered sort of low income or high burden. So it's something we think is a real genuine tension that we have to address in the allocation methodology. And so, it's something that we're keeping an eye on. We're also sort of overall looking at sort of the cost of essential programming. Overall, through all of our positions and all of our discussions, our delegation is committed a little bit to a do no harm mentality, is that there's a lot of need out there, and we cannot create a new crisis in one area to fix a crisis in another area. And the cost of essential programming is taking on more and more of a central role in that discussion. So what is the amount of money that needs to be protected to make sure we aren't doing harm in the existing work to create opportunity in future work? We think this is something that's come up a lot in the committee conversations, now the board conversations, but isn't something that I think many people feel confident they understand. And so it's something we're really trying to bring to the dialogue, is a better understanding of what that really do no harm level is, what is considered essential, and what we need to protect before we start shifting resources. And that's an understanding base we're trying to create. We also want to look at, in the allocation methodology, a part of the allocation is around sort of the disease burden and how they measure that. On the HIV side, we're still a little interested in learning more about how the indicators they're using help us project the PrEP needs. Right now everything is sort of on prevalence, not incidence. And so with so much emerging in the HIV world, it's about prevention, since HIV is, as you all know, not curable. And so want to make sure that we're making those decisions well. And then I think, on the last thing on the allocation methodology, a lot of the options being presented line up with how it was done last time, with just some changes. And again, the last replenishment not filling the coffers as well as we'd like. We just want to make sure that, are we just doing the same thing over again? Are we really making the changes we need to make? So it's kind of, again, a big swath kind of discussion. On the global disease split, I'm keeping an eye on time, Katie, I promise. On the global disease split, we don't have a consensus right now as a delegation on which direction we want to go. In principle, we obviously want the disease split to match need, and we agree with many of the stakeholders that there is a need for increased investment in TB and malaria. I think the concern is, as all of our delegations have members that represent specific diseases or more than one disease, it is not as simple as this one's full, this one's okay, now we can move on to this one. So trying to figure out that continuity of services, trying to figure out where the need is best met is really challenging and complicated, and we're tackling that with multiple conversations on our delegation and reaching out to stakeholders to get their viewpoints. And then again, of course, we also want to maintain effectiveness around the key and vulnerable populations. I think another thing on the disease split is really trying to understand not just where the money is going, but where we haven't done enough. And I think this is a place where TB, not only just the amount of investment, but where the gaps are. I think there's been a lot of questions about, why there haven't been as much on the testing side, why there hasn't been as much. And so we're trying to dig into the why, not just the how much, to make sure we're making a good example. I also think on the disease split, we're really sort of just curious about where the donor countries are coming into this. The donor countries often have their own reasons for wanting a certain area funded more than others. So in some ways, they dominate the conversation quite a bit. And so we're still trying to learn sort of where countries are aligned to sort of see where we need to push, where we need to advocate, et cetera. On sustainability and transition, we've really, as a delegation, been pushing the OIG to conduct an audit and provide examples of successful transition. This is sort of a talking point that we hear a lot at the board, that we want sustainability, we want transition, but they really haven't been able to, in our opinion, tell us what a good one looks like. Where has this been successful? Where would we want to replicate? So we've really been pushing the IG to sort of share learnings and recommendations to inform decision-making on this. And we're hoping to see some response to that request. We've also been sort of talking about on the sustainability side, like, again, how we sort of protect the investments in these sort of concentrated populations, the multi-country grants, these special populations that need protection, and haven't really necessarily seen as much as we would like on that side yet as well. And so we're really trying to figure out what they mean about, like, if we could add in a meaningful evaluation framework, or how do we assess this STC more regularly than just in these sort of 3-year intervals, because it does feel like there's more learnings we need to have in real time. And we're also trying to make sure, like, you know, that there are civil society and community responses that are supported even in these places of sustainability and transition. So making sure that eligibility for those are still there. And then my final comment, I know I'm skipping through, I have lots of notes typed up, so it's kind of hard to jump around. I just wanted to talk also on the catalytic investments. I think we've been really pleased to see that the recognition of how important these catalytic investments are on top of the grant portfolio investments. And so I think that's something that I think is a really nice shift in the tenor of the conversations, that these aren't just sort of special projects, these have real value. You know, some of the dialogues that we've been having, it is, I think the debate now is sort of, are the CIs going to be, you know, are they a luxury in a low replenishment situation, or are they even more critical in a low replenishment situation? So I think we're really kind of, I think we're sort of in the second camp, that they're even more critical in a lower replenishment scenario. But then it goes back to that comment I made before, but we don't necessarily think that funding the catalytic investments ahead of the cost of essential programming and what we really need to keep in the grant portfolio is critical. So a lot of our dialogues on the CIs are really about the method by which they're funded. Should we fund more at a lower level if they're so critical, or should we invest in one or two first, because they are more critical in a low investment area? So this is something we're going to be exploring between now and the board meeting. We're also kind of curious, this is an overall statement on sort of where digital health and rights fits into all of this. We think that sort of we hear a lot of conversations where sort of digital health is seen as a place where that can accelerate a lot of the investments that are happening, but we're not really seeing it as clearly as we'd like, either in the catalytic investments or even in the grant portfolio. So this is something that as a delegation, we're really curious about. And I feel like I'm missing something, but that's why I have other speakers, and I reserve the right to add comments onto theirs when I figure out what I left off. But I will turn it over to, do I get to pick who's next, Katie, or is there a schedule?
Well, actually, I mean, you could pick who's next. We could leave that up to you, but we do know that our developing country colleagues do have a few conflicts,
Okay.
some of them. So I did want to hand it over to colleagues. Apologies, I think I said the reverse order, but I did want to hand it over to colleagues from the developing country NGO delegation. And I believe it's either Cecilia or Yolanda up first. So over to one of you. Thank you.
Cecilia.
Okay.
Thank you, Katie. I will start. Yolanda and Sophie will add when necessary. But I just want to say that our points are almost aligned with what Catherine just talked about. But for us, this is an incredible important board meeting, and our delegation proceeds with caution and hope. And that means that we are looking for so many things and expectations. Caution is as decisions are being made around how we move forward with priorities in GC8, and what our options are if the 8th replenishment does not give us what we need to fund our programs as a global fund. Our hope is that the partnership will put together and affirm importance of the global fund and importance of value of saving lives by maintaining people on treatment. And so throughout the discussion, these are the expectations. All discussions in the lead up to this meeting have been on how can the global fund ensure we preserve programmatic progress while meeting increasing needs and addressing new challenges and still preserving the gains. By doing this in the current climate of increasing challenges, which greatly impact the work of the Global Fund grants, decreased donor financing, and a very clear signal from donors to focus on governmental ownership and health system strengthening, which is clearly evident in the Lusaka agenda. debt crisis and inability for government to engage in domestic resource financing, deprioritization of health at the country level, increased incident, particularly in TB and malaria, conflict, humanitarian crisis, climate crisis, causing impact of access to quality healthcare services, a big concern to the delegation, political instability, shrinking civil society space, and increased human rights violations. All of this means that as a Global Fund board, we'll have some very tough decisions to make, decisions which will require deep thinking and critical analysis to mitigate the impact at country level to the people we serve. Some of the key topics which will come up for discussion have been noted by GFAN, and some for decision at November board meeting, including what Catherine just talked about. I will not repeat the allocation methodology because a brief on it is that the conversation here revolves around the following: revised global disease split, the country's economic capacity curve, and the disease burden indicators used in the allocation formula. Key questions to provoke our thinking: how the split, the resources between what's actually allocated to countries through the methodology and what's going into what we call catalytic investment. This is based on the total funding being available to achieve impact. The disease split, how the resources are split between HIV, TB, and malaria, and how monies are then allocated to the countries. These were very tough discussions that we had during the meeting. On catalytic investment prioritization, the Secretariat proposed the following: a prioritized list of areas for investment which are cross-cutting but absolutely focused on making gains for the 3 diseases. Catalytic investment are proposed to start at 12 billion. Less than obtaining 12 billion will have devastating implications and will result in lives lost. Another proposal is that the catalytic investment will start at 200 million USD, 400 million, and go up from there depending on the levels of replenishment. And so this is very important. The strategic committee requested a placeholder for money for catalytic investment under the 2.6 billion USD replenishment mark, meaning if we are even lower than that, they wanted catalytic investment to remain. The amount of money is not yet determined because there are many things to be factored. The decision was passed by full consensus during the meeting. On sustainability and transition, this policy is being revised, and the strategic committee has spent time on this, and it is now coming to the board for discussion and approval. The LC had a second meeting on this, and then the Secretariat provided a revised paper addressing all the issues raised, and this has been recommended for board consideration in November board meeting. And to just close this, it is critical for all of us to work together to secure a successful global fund replenishment. It is critical for us all to prepare our communities and our actors on the ground for what's at stake and the potential realities. It is critical for all of us to continue to challenge the legal environment, which continue to be a huge challenge to access to care. We are missing the urgent needs to end structural barriers, prioritize human rights, and gender equality, and ensure funding that reaches civil society and communities, both from international and domestic resources. With such prioritization in a holistic sustainability agenda, many lives will be lost. So I will just leave that. Since somebody will be briefing us on the GHI collaboration, Gavi and Global Fund, I will not talk. I don't know if Yolanda wants to add something. I will just hand over. But thank you very much, since I've saved some time. Thank you. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Cecilia. Go ahead, Yolanda.
I didn't have anything to add. Cecilia nailed it all on the head. I just wanted to say that we didn't want to monopolize the time to talk about a Gavi GFF partnership, but just to note that we will also get an update about that again at the board. That's on the agenda, and also about the working group that's supposed to support that partnership, which came out of a strategy decision. One of the things I do want to reiterate, however, is the importance of all of us working together to have a strong replenishment. It is our reality that we live in. I am not here trying to make it sound negative, but we do live in a reality. And we do need to have strong voices at the country level, voices of our communities, what's happening, to be able to build a very strong case, a very strong advocacy case for the replenishment. And we have to continue talking to our countries, talking to our donors, advocating for the monies that we need to continue the programming. That would be my last tidbit to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is sounding more and more like a GFAN call if we're all focused on replenishment resource mobilization. Conte, did you need to jump in on something? Sorry.
Just wanted to flag the question in the chat about the developing country delegation position on the disease split, if there's something in particular that they want to share.
We can also come back to that during the discussion period too. So keep putting your questions in the chat there and we will come back with discussion. Now, the colleague from the communities delegation who confirmed attendance today has not arrived yet. So I'm not trying to put anybody on Mick's smiling and laughing knows what I'm going to say, but I do know there are a few colleagues from the delegation, and I just wondered if one of you would jump in. Mick, there may be others as well around some of the discussions to reflect on. I assume for communities as well, it's been a process of understanding the technical information through many of these pre-read documents, but then also, you know, in terms of developing positions. So Mick, not to put you on the spot, but I guess I am. Over to you. And then if there are other colleagues from communities who'd like to speak, please just jump in after Mick.
That's okay, Katie. I'm used to being put on the spot. I think I agree that this board meeting is not just I agree, the communities delegation agree that this board meeting, like a lot of board meetings though, is pretty crucial and critical decisions are going to be made. So I'll just run through some of the points because I agree with Catherine when she said, you know, they're still working on their definitive positions and decisions. I mean, we haven't got the board papers yet. We've had the SC papers and stuff. So we're still discussing that within the delegation and within our communities in country, not least the disease split. You know, I mean, we all know the TB community is making a lot of noise at the moment. And I think that what's important, I think, for us is that we don't pit the diseases against each other. That's a bottom line for us. We don't agree that HIV or malaria or TB is any more important. And that's linked to the replenishment in a lot of ways. That basically we support the idea that TB needs more funding. Obviously we do. And many of our community die from TB, even if have been living with HIV. So it's an important area for us, but not at the expense of the other diseases. So our position really is in terms of the replenishment as well. I'm sure it's along the lines of others, is that we need basically more funding. And part of that focus, we know that donors are moving away from disease-specific funding. And their focus is on RSSH and the current flavor of the month, which is climate change and the pandemic preparedness and all this. So that's a problem for us as communities. That's a problem, that if they're moving away from disease-specific funding, that's a problem. That's a real problem that affects a lot of the other decisions. So then, just briefly on the community engagement in Malawi that I think you mentioned, Katie, the communities delegation is working on, for us anyway, on having meetings with the communities in Malawi. It's difficult given the political situation in Malawi. It's very difficult. and so we're looking at ways to not put people at risk. But it is our intention for our delegation to meet with the communities in Malawi, and we're working on that. I think some of the other issues are still our standard issues and standard problems that are integrated in all the other decisions. I don't think that changes for us. So key population representation, and that's across the board. You know, if the CCM comes up for discussion, if the funding that's supposed to dribble down to communities, it's in the policy decision making, you know, key populations continue to struggle in most countries to be involved. And then linked to that, because it's all linked, and this is the problem in separating it, it's all linked, is the impact of the anti-rights movement and what that's having, and what that's having on the global fund decision making, and certainly what the impact that's having on implementation at country level. So, for example, you know, how we would be wary of giving more power to governments that brutalize and punish key populations in terms of the grant implementation. The problem is the Global Fund seems to be moving that way, and the Lusaka agenda really didn't help in giving more responsibility to the governments. That is a problem for us. So we would obviously be trying to raise those issues within different discussions. And I think that also is linked to the sustainability and transition, because effective transition is not going to happen for key populations and communities while the anti-rights movement is having so much influence. So whatever the Global Fund sets up, unless there is something more continuous than that, like a longer period, like more like direct funding to communities, for example, then successful transition is still going to be pie in the sky. And then I think finally, just because I know others have got things to say, catalytic investment. One of the things I think that we're absolutely convinced needs to be preserved, whether we get a reduced replenishment amount or not, is the funding for Community Rights and Gender Strategic Initiative. That money is one of the few options that communities have to receive money directly. And we believe that that's been a very effective catalytic investment program. And so obviously we would be lobbying for that to not be reduced, even in a reduced replenishment. I think I've covered generally most of the things. I mean, I don't do technical, Katie. I don't do technical and detail. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Mick. I mean, I think the challenge with the board meetings often are that they do get very technical, and it becomes difficult to pull out, you know, what the important sort of, you know, bigger points are, like you were just saying, Mick, in terms of replenishment, even if it is a lower amount, you know, that some of that catalytic investment type prioritization is critical regardless of the amount that's raised. And that's, you know, an interesting perspective and useful to sort of hear that. I did want to just make sure that I'm not missing somebody who's maybe on a different name and I'm just not recognizing from the communities delegation that wanted to jump in at this stage. Is there anybody else?
I think the others are in different meetings.
Yeah, I mean, I know of two others that are kind of overlapping with this one, with apologies to everyone. Ours are regularly scheduled, so, but no, it is always a challenge in the weeks ahead of a board meeting. So thank you, Mick, for sharing that. I think just to address sort of, you know, some of the questions that have come out in terms of positions, like for the delegations, you know, there's often quite a process to reach, you know, an actual firm sort of decision in terms of how a delegation is going to vote the board, for example. So on a number of these policies, those decisions have not yet been made by the delegations, because there's a process and there's still information to be coming in after the committee sort of conversations a few weeks ago. And there's a number of, trilateral kinds of conversations with different delegations to understand different perspectives. So it's just to say, it's not unusual at this stage to not have firm positions that can be shared with all of us, because those decisions, they do take time and they do involve like a large number of actors and other constituencies. But it also means if you're particularly keen on a delegation taking a certain position, then you still have a little bit of time to try and influence that if you're involved with one of your delegations or would like to be. So I would like to just open it up for questions. I'm just flagging. Yeah, okay. So I'm just seeing the question from Asia about the draft decision points that Cecilia was mentioning. The documents ahead of a board meeting are restricted in terms of the ability to actually share them, which is what makes these briefs that we do sort of complicated, but we still think it's important. And we're glad that the delegations do as well, because it's still important to give, the broader community a sense of what the discussions are going to be, even if the documents are currently essentially shut down to the board constituencies and their delegations through those rules that they have. And I'm seeing a few comments coming in, but I would just like to invite colleagues to use the raise hand function as well, or even just say in the chat if you can't find it, that you have a question, would like to come in. So please go ahead. I see Yolanda, who is unlikely to have a question and more of a comment to start us off. But Yolanda, please go ahead and then invite others to raise their hands, and we'll monitor the chat as well.
It was more to answer what I've been seeing in here. So just to reiterate with Katie, there are some things that we can't decide on or discuss at the moment because documents are coming in and we have to have internal conversations as delegations. I think what is a general principle for us to take away with the global disease split is, one, what Mick said, that we're working towards not pitting one against the other. That's very important, because if we do that, one loses, lives are lost, right? So that's one thinking behind it. The second thing also is that in this entire conversation, not just the disease split, but also the allocation methodology will be impacted depending on how much we get in the replenishment. So we're working with different scenarios which will be activated based on what we get in the replenishment. Any decision on a revision of the eligibility criteria as expected as a result. There are conversations about it. No decisions have been made about eligibility criteria or who stays or who goes or how that goes. There are no decisions that have been made there. But as we get the material, as we progress, we'll be able to share a little bit more information about some of those key topics that will come up for decision. It's the best I can give you at the moment from my end.
Thanks, Yolanda. I'm going to pass it over to Peter and then Omar, who have their hands raised. And then we'll come back to colleagues from the delegations to respond to their points or questions. Peter?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank everyone. We have had discussions, and I do agree with Matthew. And I think we all agree that in principle, we don't pit a disease against each other. And that is the mentality we want to carry through. But again, we have to be sensitive that the report from the global TB that was given yesterday is also giving figures that really should be able to move something. And Stop TB partnership had some modules on how best we can arrive at a reasonable disease split formula. But again, of course, that one was just a presentation, that module. But it gives us an idea to keep on as family of the three diseases, to keep on having the window open and opportunities to discuss the best way we can move forward, considering that the 2025 is a very hard year for the disease landscape. And therefore, we don't expect, and everybody is not expecting anything to be higher than 16 million US dollars. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Omar?
Okay, hello, Katie. Hello, everybody. Just wanted to add on to what Mick and Peter has already just said. We don't want to get the disease competing each other or sort of a thing like that, but everybody will agree that in reality, TB has been underfunded for quite a while, and which is causing a devastating impact on TB programs and TB communities in particular. So I will also want to add my voice to others and which to advocate for an increased funding for TB, at least if not up to the 33% that we from the TB communities are advocating for, but at least there should be an adjustment on the disease split on TB funding. And the second thing I would like to say is, hence we are approaching the Global Fund board meeting, and there is pertinent issue that have been around for quite a while now, which is related to communities receiving funding from the Global Fund grant at national level. It has been always proven difficult for communities to access funding at national level from the Global Fund grant. And I don't know what, if there is anything that, if there is anything that has been in place to address that situation. If not, we at our level already suggested that if possible to push forward at the board meeting to have a clear-cut percentage for communities from the Global Fund grant at country level, which will not have any interference from any other party, but it will be going directly to the communities for communities interventions. If not, it will be really difficult for communities to carry out certain activities without funding. And currently, it is really hard for communities to access funding at the Global Fund grant. And the third issue, the third thing that I would like to address, if I would just want to put it forward to everybody, to think of how to have a KVP delegation or representative at the Global Fund board. If that's something that we can discuss and see at my delegation level, I work with the KVP delegation at the Stop TB Partnership, and we are working on it tirelessly to see how we can have, because there's an issue around the KVPs, and they need a proper representation at all levels in order to address some of these issues that are affecting the KVPs. So it will be wise to have a KVP representative at the Global Fund board and a delegation for that matter. These are the three areas that I would like to put forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omar and Peter. I wanted to pass it over to colleagues from the delegations. Did you have any responses or sort of further reflections based on those comments? I know the issue of dedicated civil society funding and a certain percentage being guaranteed for civil society and communities and key and vulnerable populations has been something that many of us have advocated for many years. Yolanda, did you want to jump in?
I don't know why when I turn on my camera, you think that I'm going to jump in. Just to say that I know that, and I know Mick will come in here, I know that this is a conversation as civil society and communities, constituencies that we have discussed from time to time. My stance is it's necessary, it's important, and that's my personal stance. It's not my delegation stance, because we're still discussing how all of this fits into the puzzle. I think also it is important to advocate for, because one of the things that is critical at this juncture is collaborative approaches between governments and civil societies and communities as part of a country level response to health. And this is something I've been saying in different fora, because I think that we don't understand what country ownership means, and we think that country ownership only means government, and it does not. It's a multi-stakeholder approach. And so that's something we need to continue to advocate for. How do we empower and give resources to civil societies and organizations so that they can be collaborative partners alongside government to get some work done? And it is happening in some countries across the region. So in a few countries in LAC, for example, particularly in the Caribbean, they have started that because they see it as necessary for sustainability. And maybe that's one of the advocacy points that we need to keep pushing at the board. Mika, see your hand up, so I hand it over to you.
Yeah, I'm experiencing a degree of frustration because I want to respond to Omar, but I'm not prepared to have that discussion about representation in a public forum at the moment. I think it's a bit spurious to raise it and ill-informed, so I'll pass on that one. I do want to comment, though, around the eligibility policy, because one of the problems we have with the revised eligibility policy is that there is no discussion within that revised or in the eligibility policy per se, the impact that criminalization of key populations has, and it's not taken into consideration in determining eligibility. Now, that is the direct influence of the anti-rights movement, without a doubt. And the problem we have with some of these revisions, like the sustainability, like eligibility, is that our communities are not mentioned in those discussions. And that is a problem. That's a problem we all need to raise our hands up and protest about, because we don't exist in those policies. We don't really exist. They're increasingly aimed at government, and we can't trust government. And anybody who trusts government, you're a fool, because you can't trust government. And yeah, I just wanted to raise that because I think the issue of eligibility and the new policy, and then it will go through, and then everybody will say, okay, that's sorted out, but it's not sorted out when we don't exist in it. And the situation at country level for key populations doesn't influence eligibility when it should. When it should. Thanks.
So we can see, I think, by some of the discussions here, how challenging some of the discussions have probably been in different delegations. I know in the one that I sit in, it has been challenging as well. I'm just opening it up to questions or discussion points.
Can I chime in? I'll just chime in for 1 second, because there's a lot of comments on the TV side about the deliberations. I will say that there have been a lot of information shared. At the previous board meeting, there was a special lunch session where Stop TB spoke to many of the delegations and board members. There have been bilateral conversations. And I think, and again, I appreciate all the information. And in fact, we've expressed, our delegation in particular, expressed a lot of support for Stop TB presenting information early in the process and really bringing people along. I think the challenge is it's not the only information we're getting, right? The TB case is very compelling, and then the malaria information is very compelling, and then the gaps around HIV are very compelling in the future of that work. So there is a lot of deliberation happening. I just want to be very clear from the Stop TB side, they have been heard, and we have really engaged in that dialogue heavily with them, and because we do see the challenges they see. But so I do want to make sure that people understand that there is information coming in often and is discussed often as well.
Any other comments from delegation colleagues before I go back to sort of the speaking list? I see one hand raised. Any other interventions? Okay, sorry, Catherine, I didn't mean to not to not give you space.
No, I just really want to give kudos. I mean, I think the TB community, came out early, came out strong, came out with really compelling information, and that shouldn't be I don't want people to think that hasn't been seen or appreciated. I think sometimes it feels like this stuff goes into a vacuum and people don't know that it's been internalized and really been discussed. And I do want to, we do not have a position yet. All I can keep saying is that, but has the information reached our desk? Has the information been discussed? Absolutely.
Okay, so again, 2 hands raised, Robin and then Peter again. Robin?
Hi, everyone. My name's Robin. I work quite closely with the TB communities these days, working with TB Alliance and in other capacities in the space. But yeah, I think it's a little bit about more than just sharing information, right? So I would really encourage my colleagues working in the TB space to try to leverage the Global Fund board members and delegations as allies and maybe workshop on strategies and ways forward for securing additional funding for TB. So I guess my point is like, there maybe could be some strategic thinking being done together and coordination and collaboration being done together. So it's not just information exchange. And I say this with the biggest heart and want for no one to die of any infectious disease anywhere in the world, but sitting in Canada, knowing that there is sensitivities around these discussions and these topics, and I am supporting the campaign for more resources to go to TB, but doing it in a really delicate way where other diseases are not losing funding, there's no lost progress, there's no lost momentum in other spaces. So yeah, I just encourage, like, if possible, if that hasn't happened, more opportunities for workshopping and strategic thinking together as allies.
Peter?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity once again. Time really flies, and we have only 6 years to 2030. Are there any whispers if this is going to be the last replenishment? So we can see what levers to push. Of course, we see the Lusaka agenda coming up, but I think it should be because of the short time to 2030, it should be also very good to hear, even in little whispers, if that is going to be the last replenishment. And so the country should build up their transition, and civil society also should be able to push so that the country is on the diseases.
I feel like these are the kinds of discussions that, as others have said, are happening within and between delegations and communities of advocates. I think, it's important to note that I sit both on the delegation to the Global Developed Country NGO delegation to the Global Fund Board, as well as the alternate board member for the Developed Country NGO delegation to the Stop TB Board, and sit here on these GFAN calls and try to maintain some level of sort of facilitator, less bias. But, I do feel like there's an important conversation amongst advocates, from wherever we sit, about the very big picture that we face, both in the Global Fund replenishment, but every other replenishment, and for every other institution, and for most of us, which is the larger picture for funding overall. And when we talk about, TB, we know why, the Global Fund is so critical to get that piece right, because it is the largest external funder for TB globally. But part of the reason that it's the largest external funder globally is because we haven't had a concerted ask for something else. We haven't had a concerted ask around, a fund for TB, which, again, in this context of replenishments and, ODA dollars and all the rest of it, I'm not saying that I feel very optimistic that that's something that we should jump on right now and that we could accomplish in the next 6 months. But I do think that there's a broader conversation about how, how we do need to work together as communities and communities of advocates and civil societies around this issue to raise the funding for TB. But the reality is that in the context of the Global Fund, no matter what tinkering we do with the global disease split at this stage, frankly, it's not going to result in a lot of money. It's going to result in important money that will make a difference. Of course it will, but it's not going to be much in the terms of the bucket of funding that is needed in terms of TB. So I'm sitting on, tentative ground here. I try not to do too many of my personal opinions in these calls, but I would just say that I think, a conversation that I would be interested to have, within GFAN is that larger discussion around funding, both in general in terms of ODA and what we need in terms of ODA and non-ODA and how that needs to be directed towards where it can have the most impact in the way that the Global Fund funding, for many was an opportunity to put funding towards something that needed direct concerted action and it still does, right? In terms of the 3 diseases. And as Mick has said, wanting to preserve that perspective for the Global Fund. And I think it would be a good challenge for us to think about what's the broader funding context for TB together and think about what else is needed, not just the Global Fund, but anything else that could be increased would benefit the work that the Global Fund does as well, right? And make it more powerful and more impactful. So they just, again, these are important discussions and we have to make the best use of the Global Fund in terms of addressing, the problems of today. But I think it's useful to think about that broader discussion and to not just, and I'm not suggesting anybody has done this, but to not just sort of sit back and wait for the next, round of replenishment, the 9th replenishment, and try again to increase that share just a little bit, because it's not huge amounts of money that we're talking about. It's not going to make the biggest difference in some places. So Mick, over to you. Sorry, everybody, for taking advantage of you. Having my say.
Because I think I'm about to agree with what you just said, Katie. If we focus this board meeting and this lead up to the replenishment on the disease split, it's a political error. It's a political mistake. The issues are much broader, as Katie just outlined. It's much broader. It's related to the donor policies of moving away from funding diseases, etc., etc. And my plea to the TB community is, we all know you need more money. Nobody's denying that. But you've got to think more strategically and more politically about the bigger picture when we're talking at the level of the Global Fund and other donors. And just focusing on the disease split is a distraction from the bigger picture. And our job is to focus on the bigger picture. I'll just leave it there. I don't want to get into too much trouble with the delegation.
Well, that's okay. We did extend this call for half an hour because typically we go over on these discussions. But I just wanted to once again open it up. Is there anybody who had a question or about the processes at the board that we can respond to at this stage, knowing that there are limitations in terms of sharing a lot of the documentation at this stage? Any other questions or sort of comments? Okay. Thank you all for joining. Thank you to our colleagues from the delegations for joining and sharing succinctly, what could be shared. We do, as always, plan for an after the board meeting debrief, and this one will be, I'm seeing that there are actually a few questions. So one moment, please. I'll come back to my closing remarks later. So I'm seeing Mona and Joel. So Mona, please go ahead. Sorry that I missed you.
No worries. I was looking for the hand and I wasn't able to find it. Yeah. So I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about, you started by saying, Katie, that you are working on or looking at how Malawi's civil society will be engaged, or at what level they'll be engaged during the Global Fund board meeting. Since I will be in Malawi and work closely with our partners in Malawi, and we know that it's very chaotic on the ground, but maybe you could say something about how has it been in previous board meetings? What level should we expect, and can we push even further in a way, just to know how it has been before?
That's a good question, Mona. I'll let Joel get to their question and then we'll come back to colleagues. And if you are having trouble finding the hand raise function, everyone, it depends on your version. And so it can be in the React or it can be under participants, but also you can just do what Mona did and put it in the chat. I'm trying to pay attention there as well. Joel, over to you.
Hello.
Hello?
Hello, are you getting? Hello?
Yes,
Yeah,
go
we can
ahead.
hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Joel from Kenya, and I'm new in this platform. So I was just asking that I'm a civil society from Kenya, specifically Eldoret. So I was suggesting that if possible, maybe the civil society within Kenya from who are in this meeting, kindly we can reach out to each other so that we can support each other in our fight for TB. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel, and welcome. We do have regular calls, and we do welcome the perspectives and voices of new colleagues. So welcome. Thank you for introducing yourself. So Mona, to get back to your question, I mean, the board is a very specific process, right? So, there's very specific process in terms of who is invited to attend the actual board meeting itself. And so, that's the delegations, of course, and their support. And then, for example, the board leadership often invites guests, and GFAN has been fortunate to receive invitations as guests and observers to the board meeting since, I want to say, 2017 or something, for quite a while. And we sit there as observers, so we can participate in the official board functions as an observer. We don't speak, we don't, sometimes in the pre-days we could ask questions, we typically do not, but I do know that there are some others who do. And so what I was mentioning is that, we had a conversation with essentially the CRG and I think some representatives from the board team about which civil society from Malawi might have been invited to join specific conversations, to be speakers within the board meeting or at some of the, side events. And we got some clarity in terms of, civil society and community speakers, but less about, individual organizations from Malawi that were being engaged at that level, as opposed to, for example, being organizers of site visits. There's also a, what do they call it? Like some booth kind of areas outside the board meeting. So there's an opportunity there, not inside the board meeting, but I just forget what that was called. And I think, there was some discussion amongst the delegations. The communities delegation often does meet with their peers in the places where board meetings are taking place, as do the other two delegations. And I'm sure some of the other delegations that we don't usually have representatives here for as well. And so we're just, in terms of your colleagues, Mona, what I would say is, it's helpful now we have a WhatsApp, which we haven't done before, but, if there are colleagues, who would like to join that, and there are civil society or community groups who are asking for something or trying to, put forward a specific message at the board meeting, that WhatsApp would be a good place for all of us to be aware of that, in our bilateral meetings with whichever delegation we're participating in, or, just in the room as observers or whatever that might be. And so I think like any meeting, it's still a matter of finalizing guest lists and presenters and that kind of thing. But I will just ask Sophie, who is the CFP for the Developing Country and GEO delegation, if she wanted to jump in with a little bit more as well. I think I saw a note about that.
Katie, you covered it all, so no, thanks.
Okay, sorry. I thought I saw a note about you jumping in, so apologies. That could just have been in my head and hopeful. Mick, did you want to jump in with any further?
Yeah, just a little bit on what we're trying to work out at the moment with the communities in Malawi is whether we go to a venue that they are identified because it's safe and secure for them, or whether it's safer for them to come to a venue that's either that's much closer to the board meeting. So, like you said, we try to meet with the communities at every board meeting in the country. We are in touch with them by email, but it really is about safety and security in Malawi for the communities people. So we're just trying to work that out, which is a safer approach. I just wanted to add that because of your question about where we go. Yeah, so that's where we're at the moment. Thanks.
Katie, actually, oh, can I jump in whilst there seems to be a bit of a pause?
I think Katie froze, so yes, please, Sophie, go ahead.
Oh, just to add, that we are meeting with our constituency on the 16th in the evening. And Mick, there is also, I don't know if you know, there is a Global Fund Gavi office in Malawi that we can also use, that we are using on the 16th, which might be a kind of a, I don't know, safe space. But that's the space that we are using. And so it's really great to be able to connect with folks in Malawi to hear some of the challenges and the points that they want to be raised at the board table and beyond the board. Over. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Sophie. And it's noted. Mona, I think that's quite a bit of background information around engagement of civil society on the ground around the board meeting. Do we have any other questions? Does anyone want to add anything about initiatives that they have taken to organize events on the side of a board meeting or anything else that you want to raise?
Can I add one thing then, Quentin?
Go ahead.
Since you said initiatives, together with our community partner Paradiso TB patient organization, we're going to organize 2 events with the First Lady of Malawi to raise awareness around tuberculosis. So hoping that some of you that will be in Malawi will take part in that. It's very exciting to have such a high profile person pushing the agenda of tuberculosis. As you said, we also have to look outside the Global Fund to get more funding for TB. So that's another, we'll see how it's successful, but there's another potential avenue. Yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Mona. Welcome back, Katie. We'll keep you off camera for now if your internet isn't too good. Do we have any other questions? I see, Sophie, thank you for flagging an ASO meeting that will take place on the sideline. And Krista, I think the idea for Facebook for that WhatsApp group is indeed that anyone will be in a position to join it. So we encourage you to share it with anyone you know will be present in Malawi. And so Civil Society Partners is exactly the internet public. Any other comments? Any other thoughts? No, well. Then I want to give the floor back to Katie for the end of her closing remarks that she was rudely interrupted in the middle of by additional question and engagement, which we always welcome. Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, everyone. I was like talking and saying, I'm so sorry, Mick, you seem to have been, you seem to be frozen. And I kept talking and then realized it was me who had dropped and it was not everybody else. So I apologize. I seem to have missed something exciting around some of the different events that were shared. So encourage colleagues to use that WhatsApp group. Thank you, Margaret, for that suggestion, so that we can share details about sort of those other events and ensure that we have, if there are colleagues from Malawi organizations, community-led, community-based, KVP, civil society that should be a part of the conversations, please do invite them to join the WhatsApp. I think it's most useful probably if we are able to share any asks or any work that they're planning to do around the board meeting. So I don't even remember what I was going to say in conclusion, to be very honest with all of you, but take the conversation around the disease split and the conversation around the need to work together as a community in terms of increasing resources in general, but also thinking through the need to increase TB resources so we're not just having the same conversation in 3 years when we're reviewing these policies again ahead of the next replenishment. And just thank you again to all of our colleagues from the delegations, and thanks to all of you for joining. Our debrief from the board meeting will be at our December, I believe it's December 4th call. There are a few adjustments that we're making to the call schedule just to make sure we get everything in before people are likely to be taking end of year holidays. So we look forward to seeing you on that debrief call on December 4th. And just to tie off one little thread, we had hoped to have Carolyn Gomes, who sits as a representative of civil society on the joint working group between the Global Fund, Gavi, and GFF on this call, but there was a conflict for her. And so we have invited her to join us and share that update either on that December 4th call or another one that she can make, so that we can share an update with all of you about that work. And I think that that's it. Our next call, though, will be on the 13th of November, and you'll have the reminders and the information in your calendar as usual. And just thank you all very much for joining, and for the passion that you all bring to these conversations as always. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your days.
Bye, everyone. And thanks again to the delegations for joining us for really insightful comments and conversation throughout the call. Bye-bye.